Hey everybody, and welcome to Simulmedia Live. My name is Matt Collins, and I'm broadcasting to you live from the offices of Simulmedia at 28th and Park Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. I hope all of you are safe and well, and thank you so much for joining. If you're anything like me, uh, the last several months have seen an acceleration of activity and output. And so, under those circumstances, and with all the swirl that's happening outside of the work that we're doing. I really, really appreciate it that you're taking time out to come and join us for what I think is going to be a spectacular conversation about the power of branding. And so, in that context, I wanted to sort of tee up some observations that I suspect many of you will have shared or had a chance to observe in your own journeys. That if you work in technology, and if you have ever worked and reported to a founder in a technology company, oftentimes you come to recognize a certain pattern in the way that talent comes on board and the way priorities are set. It's not uncommon at all, for example, for founders to prioritize among their very first hires engineering talent to make and refine that product and accelerate the work towards product market fit. And then also to hire sellers who can go and find those early adopters, those innovators. If we think about the adoption curve that Jeffrey Moore prescribes in Crossing the Chasm, those early buyers, those innovators, those tech enthusiasts who are going to be that first market for a product and maybe ready for something that doesn't quite necessarily have product market fit. And I remember the last startup before I joined Simulmedia, it was made very explicit to me that marketing was the last thing to be brought on as a major skill set and expertise. That very clearly the company had prioritized product and engineering. And I, even as a marketer and someone who wears the marketing uniform and waves the marketing flag fairly proudly, I thought, you know what, the sequencing there makes some sense to me. That you want to have that product and make sure that there's product market fit, and you want to test that hyper serving a niche audience, something that Seth Godin prescribes in sort of his marketing worldview. And then you devote marketing resources to it to help scale it once you've solved for some of those other core issues. Well, my guest today, Emily Heyward, who is the co-founder of Red Antler and head of brand at Red Antler, an agency that focuses on helping especially young technology companies find their branding voice and build distinctive brands, has a different perspective. And she's written about it recently in a book that she's just published called Obsessed: Building a Brand People Love from Day One. I think we have an image of that book, which I'd love to be able to show on camera. We'll get to that. But Emily Heyward, it's so good to have you. I will also just throw out the fun fact that you are the first child of a previous Simulmedia Live guest to ever appear on the show, the second generation. Your father is Andrew Heyward, who's become a very good friend of mine, a man I respect enormously, and who's also serves on the Simulmedia Board of Advisors. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I liked you before I even met you. It's great to have you on the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
It's very good to have you, Emily. All right, I'm gonna sort of take this intro that I just gave, and I'm gonna turn it around on you. Imagine I'm the founder of a technology company, and I've got a gadget or a widget that I'm so eager to sell, and I've just told you what I heard. That, hey, Emily, I think it's great that you've got this branding thing and Red Antler. I've heard wonderful things about Red Antler and the clients that you've served, but let me tell you why my situation's different. I've got to build this product. I need to find product market fit. I need to hire a team of at least 2 or 3 sellers that can go find me some customers. That can give me feedback. Let's talk about branding maybe next year. Tell me why I'd be wrong.
Well, first of all, that was a script that we heard quite frequently in 2007 when we started Red Antler. I think we were one of the first creative services companies to come out and say, you need to start thinking about brand before you launch. And I think it actually all begins with how we define brand, and actually even the difference between branding and marketing. I think too often people confuse the expressions of brand with the definition of brand. They'll say, I have a name, so I have a brand, or, I have a tagline, so I have a brand. But for us, the notion of brand goes much deeper. And really what it is having incredible clarity about the problem that you're solving for your audience, and therefore what your business stands for. You can almost think of the definition of branding as why does this business exist? Or why should people care that this business exists? So when you think of it that way, it actually needs to be the lens through which you view all of your business decisions, including product, features, functionality, but also certainly your sales pitch. I think to even think about going out there and trying to garner interest when you haven't taken the time to really focus your message and determine what makes you different, what makes you special, what do you stand for, I would say that's a waste of your sales hires and your sales money.
I think you're right. I mean, another way of imagining this is that in hiring sellers, you've hired their very first amplifiers, and they're out there to give voice to your product, to your service, in what is almost certainly going to be a marketplace where they'll encounter somebody who says, "Wait, tell me how you're different." and when that really then swerves headlong into the world of branding, isn't that right?
Absolutely. I would liken it to fishing with a net with holes. And I think you run the risk of false negatives with that approach because your sales team is out there, they're not gaining traction. You start to question whether you have product market fit. But in reality, most likely it's that you haven't spent the time and made the effort to really clarify why this business matters and what makes it different in a way that's palatable, digestible, and compelling.
I'm joined today by Emily Heyward. She's the co-founder of Red Antler and also now an author. She's the head of brand at Red Antler. And while we're on the subject of Red Antler, Emily, why don't you describe for us what does Red Antler do? What is its reason for being?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with the beginning of my career, which was working in traditional advertising. And I was very fortunate. I had a great job at a big global agency working on large national TV campaigns for established brands, some of which had been around probably a century and maybe hadn't even changed all that much in that time. And I learned a ton. But over the years, I grew frustrated because I felt we were being asked to solve the wrong problems. We were being tasked with coming up with new messages to say about products that hadn't really changed all that much and hadn't really kept up with the times and weren't necessarily relevant anymore to the people they wanted to reach. And we couldn't affect the things themselves. So as the New York startup scene was just getting going in 2006, 2007, my co-founder and I saw an opportunity to build a creative services company that could be a partner to entrepreneurs and really think about how do you embed brand in a business from the beginning and really think about brand as a driver of business growth. Think about brand as the lens through which you view how you build internal culture, how you establish your company's values, and then certainly how you bring that experience to life for consumers. So we offer a full service creative solution that was designed to be a partner to entrepreneurs. And half of our clients to this day are pre-launch. We get involved usually sort of 8 to 12 months out from launch and help founders bring their vision to life across the entire consumer experience and the brand experience.
We're going to get into some of the book, which I highly recommend. I was telling Emily before we came on that I'm about 20% of the way through it, and even though I'm reading it on a Kindle version, it's marked up pretty thoroughly with insights that not only prepared me well for this interview, but as the head of marketing for a technology company, a 12-year-old technology company in the advanced television advertising space, I'm learning an awful lot, and so I highly, highly recommend it. We'll get back to the book here in a second. Emily, I wanted to come back to this notion about brand being associated with a driver of growth. I saw an article probably last week that ran in Media Post that summarized research by Pivotal that looked at the recovery of advertising spend in the second quarter. And it noted that performance marketing had essentially fully rebounded from pre-shutdown levels. And brand, however, brand marketing, brand advertising was still lagging. The conclusion which Pivotal drew and which others have drawn is that performance is leading now in brand, and that performance marketing is where a lot of advertisers are many more advertisers are shifting their budgets. I wonder if you look at that premise there of brand versus performance and see it as a sort of a false premise that really actually Maybe there's some usefulness in the taxonomy for the purposes of classifying advertising, but for the purposes of what businesses care about, which is growth, there's absolutely no reason why brand can't be a growth driver. How do you see it?
My personal mission is to erase that distinction. I think that performance, can mean what is it means media that we can measure, right? And I understand the importance of data. And now that we have data, data is addictive, right? You're spending $1, you want to see how that dollar is coming back to you. But there's absolutely no reason why you can't be running performance marketing that is brand additive. I think that performance can be done in a way that is part of your overall brand narrative, that contributes to your brand story, and that helps people understand, again, why they should care about you beyond just running an offer or, throwing them a discount, right? And then when you think about, where performance media is driving people, which is presumably to your website, that's also brand, right? There's a story that's then told there, and that's the rest of your funnel is just as important. So to me, I think that it's a really dangerous distinction, and it runs the risk of sending businesses down a path where they continue to throw money at performance marketing without thinking about how they're really like building up their brand equity overall and telling a holistic story.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm reminded here of a couple things. The first is that it's something you just said a moment ago, that a lot of people conflate branding with marketing or branding with advertising, when in fact really they're separate things. And branding done right informs all of those activities, but more. It informs company values, the culture that may be established. It works its way into a sales deck and so much more. I'm also reminded of a really important distinction, which came out in some research that Binet and Fields published, I believe, in February of this year. And they were looking, admittedly, at the B2B marketplace, but they pointed out that in B2B, a business to business marketing, at any given time, 90% of our target audience is not actively looking to buy in that moment. 10% are. Now, the messages that we deploy, the advertising that we deploy and the content that we create, the promotions, the events, all the tactical things that we do to cater to in-market and out-of-market customers has to be different. If you're an out-of-market customer, but nevertheless in the segment, the chances of you reacting to a feature-laden description of what this product can do and all the benefits that it can convey, limited. Because guess what? You're not actively looking to buy. And my friends at LinkedIn, John Lombardo and Peter Weinberg, point out that this illustrates why Geico has two fundamental thrusts of its ads. It has 15 minutes can save you 15% or more in car insurance, to speak as to a very practical benefit to those who are in market to switch. And everything else is a get-go. And it plants a memorable seed in your mind so that if you're out of market, you get to know that. And when you do come into market, that memory creates a shortcut, reduces overhead, allows you to make a faster, better decision. I point all this out because those who study this understand that in many ways, the only useful distinction between brand and performance is on a time scale. That brand done correctly will grow. It may just grow over a longer period of time than a performance marketer who's looking to harvest someone who's in market and ready to buy in the next week. So I want to point out, because I think we're doing the same things.
I love that. And I also think we've seen time and again with our clients that the ones who do a good job investing in brand, and if we talk about brand as storytelling, awareness, sort of engagement that exists before and beyond the moment of purchase, their performance assets perform so much greater. It's it feels like a more monetarily sensible path to just put all your money in performance. It's a really expensive path to rely only on performance, because those assets need to work so hard if you haven't spent any other effort building a relationship.
Right. And you hear about the performance marketers who wake up at night in a cold sweat, worrying about, among other things, whether or not they're one day going to show up to work and find out that suddenly their numbers are upside down, in part because they've pumped the well dry and they've harvested all the in-market customers. It's getting more and more expensive to to convince people who are not in market or maybe not quite yet to buy. And so their economics turn upside down, and they suddenly in that moment realize that all that performance has been in the true DR spirit of offer, time bound, expressed with urgency. And what's missing in all of that? Any notion of branding.
Yeah, totally. And I think it becomes really hard to competitively differentiate if you're in a crowded category because your competitor can come along and offer a slightly better deal, and you've done nothing to set yourself apart beyond that.
I'm talking today with Emily Heyward. She is the co-founder of Red Antler, a branding agency with a very strong point of view about the importance of building brands at even the earliest stages of company development. If any of you watching today have a question for Emily, please ask it. We have eyes on every channel in which we're broadcasting today, and we will get your question to Emily before we adjourn. Emily, I want to ask a question that gets back to the book. I have found one of the most useful parts of the book, which I'll reference again, Obsess, Building a Brand people love from day one, is the frameworks that it includes there for guiding founders. I mean, it's really written for a very broad audience. You don't have to be a seasoned marketing veteran to understand this. But I wanted to I ask you to take the audience through some of the early process. So you imagine you've convinced the founder pre-launch that investing in brand is the right thing to do right now. What are some of those first steps that you and your peers at Red Antler take them to start building that brand?
So this shouldn't come as a surprise to you, Matt, since you work in marketing, but it always starts with the consumer. And I think this actually sometimes does come to a surprise as a surprise to founders, because I've found one of the very first questions that I ask our founders is, what's the problem that you're solving for people? And these are all very smart founders who spend a lot of time thinking about this. And 99 times out of 100, they don't answer with the problem, they answer with the solution. So they'll say to me, oh, the problem I'm solving is, data visibility. Or the problem I'm solving is, a more convenient way to buy dog food. And I'm sitting there thinking, those aren't problems. That's your business idea. So we have to then go through the exercise of really helping them dig into what's the pre-existing need that this business is going to be an answer for. Even if you have the most innovative business in the world, actually, especially if you have the most innovative business in the world, it's only going to succeed if you find a way to tap into a need that people already have. They may not know they need your business, they probably don't, but there's something that's missing from their lives. There's something that they're not currently getting from the existing landscape that your business needs to be an answer to, or there's no reason for your business to exist in the first place. So we always start there, is what's the problem, and making sure that we're going deep enough and that we're really digging beneath the obvious problem, like, oh, it's inconvenient to shop for light bulbs. Okay, why does that matter? Why does that matter? Like, let's keep digging deeper and really get to the heart of what makes these people tick. And then that sets us up for the answer. It actually gets much easier from there when we start to think about what the brand should stand for. If we've done our job cracking the problem, then the solution is right in front of us.
I have to ask you a question about this. Why does that matter questioning sequence, which is presented with a sense of humor in the book, because I want you to tell the audience, where did every one of these exercises terminates at the same endpoint, which is?
Yeah. So this is my why test, and you are only allowed to stop asking why does that matter until you get to fear of death, because my belief is that all of our actions are ultimately motivated by our sense of our own mortality. Now, of course, once you get to fear of death, you're probably not going to build your brand on that idea, and you can kind of go back and figure out what the actual insight is. But it's sort of my funny way of making sure that, my team has gone deep enough and that we're not just stopping at a more surface or shallow idea of the people that we're trying to reach.
So that made me, because I got that too, and it had me wondering though, how do you know when you've gone far enough? It's not fear of death, and it may not even be the why does that matter answer that precedes the one that is fear of death. It may be one or two generations before that. How do you know when you've got it?
I think you want to strike a balance of specificity and universality. And what I mean by that is, you don't want it to feel so small and narrow that when the business evolves, which it certainly will, you've rooted your whole brand in a problem that is only solved by one small feature, right? I think you want it to feel like you're tapping into a more universal truth, something that a lot of people share, something that actually exists that's sort of bigger than the business itself. But at the same time, I think it needs to be connected to the business. I think you don't, there's certain problems that we're all facing, right? Like a need to be loved and a need to feel safe. And like those are great, but that can feel generic. So I think you sort of want to find your specific way into a universal theme, if that makes sense.
Yes, it sure does. If any of you watching have a question for Emily Heyward, the co-founder of Red Antler, feel free to ask it. I've got only one more question, and audience questions are piling up, so I'm gonna very quickly move away from me and over to you. You said something to me which really resonated, and I feel like I've been trying to articulate an idea that you this idea, which I'll mention in a moment, for a better part of a decade. You said to me in the build up to this, I just want to get the quote right. You said, um, everyone has access to the same math. And I took that to mean, in the context of the work that I do, that the days of relying on growth hacking or the same sort of algorithmic approaches to powering growth in this very dopamine laced environments, very performance heavy environments, the days of being able to find arbitrage opportunities there are over. I think this also speaks to the phenomenon of barriers of entry coming down all over the place. And if we can all rent essentially the same supply chains and have access to the same swanky offices in various urban hubs around the country, does that really leave branding as the most powerful asset left to differentiate one company from the next?
I sure think so. I think this is directly tied to the conversation you and I were having earlier about why performance marketing alone can't drive a business. I just don't think the opportunities to exploit the algorithm are what they once were. And same is true for getting a business off the ground in the first place. I think it used to be that proprietary technology was a huge competitive advantage. I think that's still true in some very, very rare cases, but for the most part, I think technology is accessible now. And if you're working on something, chances are there's a team that's working on the identical thing at the identical time because they also see that opportunity. So what it really boils down to is how are you going to exceed people's expectations and form a connection that extends beyond just the functional description of what you do or where you're showing up from a media perspective.
I so enjoy this book. Again, I cannot recommend it enough. I think no matter where you are in your marketing career, you will learn something new from Obsessed, building a brand that people love from day one. So, and we'll talk about where you can get that here in a sec. All right, let's get to audience questions. Our first one comes from Rebecca. Rebecca wants to know, great question, it's on my mind a lot. What do you think, Emily Heyward, is the future for brand marketers in B2B? And who do you find to be your best in-house champions for this exercise? Is it brand marketers, product marketers, or someone else?
So I actually, Matt, you cut out slightly the future of brand marketers in blank, and I didn't hear the
And
word. So,
that's okay. In business to business marketing.
oh, B2B. Okay. Um, so the future of brand marketers in B2B. So I think that, it's incredibly important for businesses to have this kind of talent in-house. And I think that I've seen a lot of my startup clients make the mistake of having two separate teams for brand and growth. And I think the challenge with that is that those two objectives are always seen at odds, right? And it's always a question of where does the budget go? Are we investing in brand today or are we investing in growth today? And my hope would be that those two work streams, those two ethoses get merged internally. Because I think that you want to be thinking about product marketing in a way that's brand additive. And you want to be thinking about brand marketing in a way that's connected to the product. and that's tangible for people, and that's not just sort of like a pretty layer that sits on top, but that actually connects whatever messages you're saying to ultimately what the product is going to do for people and how it's going to make people's lives easier. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but my guess would be that the future is going to be erasing the distinction between brand marketing and product marketing, because I think that both have to do both.
I would agree with that. I think that there is good brands run threads that connect an emotional need or expectation with a customer with a product and a company behind it. And so to me, whether you call that function that it's responsible for finding and needling that thread to be brand marketing or product marketing, the one true thing is that product is in it no matter what. And so my hope and expectation would be that product is at the core of any brand marketing exercise, and that the task of getting the work done may come down to sort of a divvying up of things, the work to be done, jobs to be done that depend on certain skill sets, but they cannot be divorced. And I'll go back, Rebecca, I highly recommend Benet and Field's research from February. I don't have that citation handy, but it published, I believe, through LinkedIn's B2B Institute. And it makes such a compelling case for brand marketing to not only survive, but thrive in B2B. And I would say now more important than ever, even as performance increases, it's so important for brands, even B2B brands, to stay in front of their customers. And again, recognize that at any given time, most of them are not going to be actively looking to buy your product at that time. And so it's so important that you stay active in front of them. And so when they do enter the market, you've got something that they'll remember. So, Rebecca, thank you for that question. We actually Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, we have other questions, but I'm sure this applies to more than Rebecca. I think we get asked a lot, do these lessons apply to B2B? Is this relevant for B2B, or is this really just for consumer brands? And I actually think it's even more important for B2B businesses to think about how to simplify and clarify why they matter to people. There's no business that's making a decision, right? It's still a human on the other side. And chances are that human has to get a lot of other humans on board, right? They don't get to just make the decision and pull the trigger. So you need to give them the tools to talk about you. And if that's too complicated, if that's too jargon filled, if it's too hard for them to find the thread of why you're different than the competition, they don't stand a chance of getting that critical buy-in within their organization.
That's so true. That is so true. So many of these B2B purchase decisions are now group decisions because no one, many of them are expensive decisions, and no one person wants to be the one holding the credit card and swiping it without having checked in with several other people. So I think you're spot on. Rebecca, thank you for your question. We have another Rebecca who is asking, what is the difference, Emily Heyward, between brand and strategic communications roles?
So, in terms of a job description, I'm not sure I totally understand the question.
Yeah, I think that is speaking to the work to be done in shaping a brand, and so much of brand, I think many of us who come up in business know that brand can find its life through communication, and I suspect that there are many people who work in communication roles who find themselves de facto stewards of a company's brand. So if you work in communications for a company, is that a very different thing from branding?
So I think that strategic communications, from what I understand of the question, would be a critical expression of the brand. To me, I think of brand as getting the fundamentals right. It's your building blocks. It's that first sense of what your purpose is and how that comes to life across various channels. But it can't sit still either, right? The world is going to change around you. You're going to need to respond to trends, to movements, to your product evolving, to the category evolving. And I think that's where having that definition tight from the beginning, but then having, strong thinkers in strategic communications who continue to build on that message, evolve it, and figure out how it's relevant for this particular moment in time.
I think that's right. And certainly if I go back to sort of a classic consumer packaged goods model of brand marketing, typically the remit for brand marketers in that format the scope is wider than someone even in a strategic communications role. My experience, strategic communications roles are responsible for authentically representing and amplifying that brand, but to one subset of a brand's overall audience. And the work that they do typically is in line and an agenda that's set based on someone who's responsible for the overall brand and gives direction for how strategic communications can amplify. But if it's done well, the organizations I've seen that do it really well, there's also a feedback loop. So if you work in strategic communications and it's your job to amplify one company, your brand or your company's brand, or if you're an agency, one of your clients' brands in the marketplace, and you learn things about how certain messages land and resonate, the best organizations have feedback loops for capturing that and building that feedback into the evolution of the brand.
That absolutely makes sense.
We've got other questions. We're at the time that I know I pledged I'd release you, Emily, but we have two more questions. Do you have a time to hang on for them?
I absolutely do.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's go to Anonymous here has a question which I love. I have a point of view on this, but I want to hear yours first. Anonymous asks, one of the things both of you have mentioned is that establishing a brand has a longer time horizon. With this long, and by the way, I think that's probably more my point of view. I think Emily's made a compelling case that brand actually, if done right, can have a very immediate payback. But nevertheless, let's stick with the question. With this longer time horizon, what are good ways to measure if we are on the right path for establishing our brand? And I think that's a fantastic question, Emily, for you to tackle first.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that we get asked all the time, especially because we're asking our clients to pay us money to take this leap of faith and believe that brand is important. And of course, our very data focused entrepreneurs want to know, how are they going to measure the impact of this? It's a tricky one. And I think that initial work of establishing your brand strategy and your brand identity needs to be seen as an investment that's going to buoy all of your other activities. So there's a little bit of trust that needs to come into that piece of it. But from there, you can continue to measure the ways in which the brand is having impact. And again, that goes back to the difference between branding and marketing. I think that you've got to do your job in the beginning to create a brand that really expresses why you exist. Ideally, that's not something you feel the need to continue to test and iterate on, right? That should really be true to who you are and the core of your business and why you started it in the first place. But there's lots of different ways to bring that to life. And that's when you get into campaigns, PR efforts, all of the streams of activity that are much more tangible and that can be tracked to results in a clearer and data-focused way.
I completely agree. I'll point out just some learnings that some of Simulmedia clients have shared with us and that we've observed. The power of a strong brand over time produces certain telltale symptoms, which may be the wrong word given the connotation of using the word symptom, but nevertheless, it produces indicators. One of the indicators that several of our clients rely on for getting a read on brand health is the extent to which their manifestations of that brand through the media that they acquire, the media that they buy, or the media that they borrow or that they earn is impact on top of funnel as measured through digital activity. So they're looking at when they launch a particular campaign or they engage in a series of campaigns or a PR story hits, what kind of changes do they see in top of funnel website traffic relative to some notion of a baseline, and how much of that traffic might be attributable to this branding event, a marketing event that's informed by brand, and that we can statistically, with some significance and confidence, say, you know what, probably not. That didn't happen by accident. And we have several brands that have a constant and an ever-changing notion of a dynamic baseline of what normal looks like, given all their marketing channels firing, and so they know when they launch something new or different, they can look at the change in website traffic and say that's one read. Another, Emily, to your point, we work with other companies that look at the effects of advertising, and in this case with branding heavy messages, on other advertising key metrics. So they'll look at search volume. They'll look at the cost of their acquisitive advertising for Facebook and Google, with the notion that if you're driving more clicks but not really having to pay for them because this other manifestation of a brand is really carrying the heavy water, then you could say, hey, that improvement in performance and that more mid to down funnel activity you could attribute to brand. And then, of course, there's the aided and unaided awareness, which have been around for decades and require a bit more structure and time to implement, but can give that canary in a coal mine perspective on maybe what kind of positivity, hopefully, that you're building that you could count on harvesting down the line in the form of future consumers in your market. So there are all of these ways that I think I could imagine, if I were responsible for answering this question for a particular brand, I could imagine building a pretty thorough dashboard that would capture some of these signals that would give a CFO who might look at brand and see something fluffy and rather than the core, the performance engine that it should be, some confidence that actually the money's being well spent.
Yep. Maybe you can help us build a dashboard. It sounds like a great idea.
It's a great question. We've got just one more, and then we'll adjourn. This one comes from Dee. And Dee asks, what's your advice to brands that quickly jumped to be culturally sensitive, but as the veil lifts, it's clear that it's nothing more than an ad campaign and not an actual internal corporate shift? It's a great question and pretty timely, I think, given the racial unrest in this country and the enormous corporate response to it. I think what Didi's asking is, what do you do if it becomes clear that the response is really only skin deep?
I think they got to get moving on action. I think this is an incredibly timely question. And I love this question because so many people have been asking me in the past month, how should brands be responding to the Black Lives Matter movement? And my feeling is this is not a moment in time when brands should be quiet. I think almost every company in the United States has some reflection to do on, their internal practices, the ways in which they've been contributing or not contributing to the anti-racist movement, and the internal, makeup of their teams, especially at a leadership level. But my rule is you have to be doing more than you're saying. So yes, you should say something because not saying something speaks just as loudly, but you've got to make sure that you're doing more than you're saying. And I think if that, if people start to scratch the surface and see that you're not, it's time to figure it out, figure out what actions are appropriate for you to take and where to begin, and then approach that process with humility and transparency, and don't get defensive that, maybe you got out ahead of your messaging, and there's more work to be done, but do the work.
That makes so much sense to me. And in some ways, it might relieve the pressure off of those who are responsible for being the mouthpiece, because it really turns the attention inwardly to say, hey, look, in order for these chords to really strike and resonate, there has to be deep authenticity to them, which means that they have to be embedded as a part of the culture. And that's the work to be done. It's not so much immediately about how do you message that stuff, because quite frankly, that would seem to only risk perpetuating the very problem that you've diagnosed in the first place. That if all the attention is on how do you get the message right, then you're probably continuing to miss on the core of the problem, which is this is really fluffy and not particularly substantive, and not likely to lead to any kind of permanent change.
So well put. Completely agree.
Well, Emily, this has been so fantastic. I love that I get a chance to speak to an author of something that I'm so enjoying and find so valuable. And so I thank you for that. I'm sure that other people are going to enjoy this book. Where can they find it?
Well, of course, there's Amazon, as well as bookshop.org, which is an amazing website if you prefer to shop independent bookstores instead of Amazon.
Buy the book. If you work in marketing, or if you're a founder and you want to just provide better guidance to marketers, even if you don't really understand the function very well, you don't need to get value out of this book. It's written for a broader audience, and so I highly recommend it. And then for people who want to get in touch with Red Antler or you, what's the best way to do that?
So the answer for both is the same, which is you can email me at emily@redantler.com, and also Red Antler, as well as I am on Instagram. I'm not so active on Twitter, but I'm very active on Instagram. So you can find both of us there.
Awesome. All right, Emily Heyward, say hi to your dad for me.
I definitely will, and I'll thank him for introducing us. This was such a pleasure.
I had a blast. Thank you for being on Simulmedia Live. Folks, we're going to adjourn for the day. I want to thank all of you again for taking time out of busy schedules to spend it with us and with our great guest, Emily Heyward. I want to thank Emily once again for coming on and talking about the wonderful work that she's doing and her book. And so with that, we adjourn. I hope all of you have a relaxing weekend in store and can't wait to see you again next time on Simulmedia Live. Until then, my name is Matt Collins. Take it easy, everybody. Bye-bye.